Thank you. Let's do one more minute and then we can get started. So everybody grab your coffees and grab your waters.
While we're waiting, Hunter, I made you a co-host. If you can help me admit people as they come in, please.
Okay.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I should have just made it as, allowing people to join in without a waiting room, but it's what it is.
Those are the Zoom rules.
Right.
I guess I got it. Thank you, though.
All right, sweet. Thanks, man. Yeah, people will just keep on trickling in.
Yeah. All right. So without further ado, let's get this started. First of all, I want to say welcome to everybody and thanks for making the time to be with us today. My name is Gustavo Andrade. I am an immigrant from Brazil. I am the executive director at the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. I want to thank my colleagues, Jose Aguayo, Stephen Lester, and for being on this call today. We have a whole lot to talk about when it comes to landfills, and by the number of people who are SVP'd and who were able to join us, it seems like it's a topic that a lot of folks have a lot of interest in. We have run many campaigns with actually many of you whom I recognize from this call. I am turning my volume up per popular request. There's a whole lot to talk about when it comes to landfills, and there's more than we can cover in just an hour. But what we hope to do today is fill you in whether you are dealing with a landfill at near your local community, or whether you just have an interest in this. I want to say that, first of all, if you're concerned about a local landfill in your area, you're absolutely right to be concerned. That there's a lot of misinformation out there, particularly from the companies who profit from local landfills, as well as local governments, who in many different ways get funding from the landfill companies and operators. And there's a lot of folks who will tell you that, you know what, there's nothing to worry about, who really minimize the impacts on your health, your family's health, your neighbor's health of such a facility. And what we hope to do here in our conversations is to really demystify and bring some truth forward, because we find that truth is actually in very, very short supply nowadays. What we do at CHEJ is we empower communities to fight back and win justice. And we are on your side. So we are, people who are have a lot of experience, both running campaigns and in some cases have been personally impacted by a lot of the chemicals that are produced in such facilities. And what makes CHEJ special is that we have people like Jose and Stephen with us who are actual scientists. And when we say actual scientists, like they have letters after their names and they actually went to school to figure out some of the stuff. I know that a lot of us, and certainly a lot of you who live near these facilities, sometimes we can feel like we have gone to university and have a master's and a PhD and all of this stuff just from doing your own research. And our scientists are people scientists. They are people who are both have the knowledge and the training, but they also have the values that really reflect the community. So as far as we're concerned, there are a lot of people who have a financial interest in keeping folks in the dark and have a financial interest in making sure that people don't fight back. What I will say is that when companies decide where they're going to dump their waste, they make these decisions very, very deliberately. And what they have chosen to do in the United States historically is that they have chosen to put their facilities in communities that they feel don't have the power or the resources or the wherewithal to fight back. And that is a very, very deliberate choice on their part. There are papers written on the subject since the 1980s, as far as I know, with things like the Sorrell report that really outline their decision making. In other words, they don't choose where to dump their waste by accident. They put it in specific places where it's immigrants, it's people of color, and it is folks who are of lower income, and that's wrong. So what we're doing here is we're helping you fight back. And first of all, it's about giving folks the information. So we need to get some facts out there about what landfills are, and that's what Jose is going to do. And then we're going to talk about certain strategies and share with one another ways that people fight back. So without further ado, I want to introduce you all to Jose Aguayo. I'm really, really excited to have him on and talk about the science of landfills, what they are, and some of the ways that the chemicals that they release impact your health. So Jose, take it away.
Thank you, Gustavo. Hi, everybody. As Gustavo mentioned, my name is Jose Aguayo. I am a CHEJ's Senior Science Associate, and I work closely with our Science Director, Stephen Lester, helping our organizers through the technical aspects of toxics and all aspects that involve environmental justice, with the knowledge that us scientists are tools, right, in what CHEJ does. We are not the main source or the main aspect that will win you a fight. We are simply tools that you use, as I mentioned, to advance a particular cause, and that is probably a training in itself that we can have later down the line. The role of science in organizing, especially around environmental justice and environmental justice issues. But without further ado, I guess I will transition over to sharing my screen. Let's see if we can do this. Screen share, there it is. That is what I want to share. Okay. All right, I hope that everybody can see my screen now. So I will, as I was mentioning previously, I will be talking about landfills and the more technical aspect of it in order to move our fights, whether you are opposing the an operating landfill or trying to prevent the siting of one near your community. It's important to know some of the basics of how landfills work or don't work, for that matter. And that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on. And then Gustavo later on is going to take on that information and kind of dig a little deeper into the way that industry handles the landfill business and how that in itself is something to watch out for. So for my part, I'm going to talk about what is a landfill. Right. And this particular quote up here really gets me going, because this is what EPA tells you a landfill is. They tell you it's a well-engineered and managed facility designed to protect the environment from contaminants. It definitely is not. It is none of those things. Even the most sophisticated, the most newly built landfills are really a best attempt at trying to keep waste hidden as long as you can. because really landfills are essentially facilities where waste is thrown and buried, right? They're often sited near poor neighborhoods, near environmental justice communities, and especially where, like, as Gustavo mentioned earlier, right, where the industry believes that public influence will not be strong. The industry thinks that if they build a landfill in a particular place, in a poor neighborhood, that neighborhood is not going to have the means or the organization, right, to be able to say something about it. And they're often the source of serious ground, air, and even drinking water contamination. Now, I'm going to touch on the three main different types of landfills. That is municipal solid waste, industrial waste, and hazardous waste. But before, I'm going to touch a little bit on the design in general of all landfills. It varies from the specific type of landfill, but the variations are very minimal. And really, they all boil down to this four kind of setup, 4-layer system that has a bottom liner. It could be a clay liner. It could be a synthetic liner or a mixture of the two. But there's always a liner at the bottom that's intended to keep the waste and the water from leaking down into the subsurface. Above that, there's a drainage system that, again, is intended to collect leachate, and I'll explain what leachate is down the line later on. Water, really, and any contaminated liquids that build up at the bottom, right atop that bottom liner. There's also a gas collection system because landfills tend to get hot because they're compressing things, and there are oftentimes chemicals in there that can be combustible. So there's a gas collection system there, and then there's the waste. And at the top, they usually cover it. If it's an active landfill, they'll cover it with a small layer of soil, or if it's a closed landfill, they'll try to put a cap on it. But this is really the main design of a landfill. It hasn't changed in decades, several decades. So the first type is a municipal solid waste. So this is the most common type. It receives household waste, and it can also receive a number of other non-hazardous wastes, as they're termed. Things like commercial waste, hazardous sludge, as they call it, things, stuff that comes from a fryer, for example, conditionally exempt and small quantity generator waste, which you would expect to go to some sort of industrial or even hazardous waste facility, but no, it can be admitted here. And other types of non-hazardous industrial solid waste. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of variability in these other types of waste that a solid waste municipal landfill accepts. And because there's that variability, it is very easy for industrial and even hazardous waste to make its way into a landfill. And Gustavo's probably going to touch on this later on, but the industry really is set up to incentivize more waste coming into a particular landfill, and to disincentivize rejecting that waste, right? So they don't really care what type of waste is coming. It just means more money to them, right? So if you're bringing in something that should go to a hazardous waste landfill, or that hasn't even been checked to see what it is, right? Odds are it's going to be accepted. And then the other two types of landfills are industrial waste landfills and hazardous waste landfills. Industrial waste landfills receive things like concrete, lumber, asphalt, and building materials. They're not much different than solid waste landfills, but oftentimes they try to recycle some of these materials, which solid waste landfills tend to not. And hazardous waste landfills, as the name says, they receive a lot of hazardous material. Polychlorinated biphenyls, for example, PCBs, radioactive waste, other toxic chemicals. These have much more stringent guidelines, but are very notorious for poor enforcement. And these are some of the regulations that it is important to kind of be aware of, that really, landfills fall into two categories in terms of where they're regulated. Either they can be regulated through the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, or through the Toxic Substances Control Act. And that is, you can think about it, one as being a state and local enforcement under RCRA, or a federal enforcement through TSCA. And both of them have problems. Those that are enforced by the local and state governments under RCRA have a lot of variability in the supervision and the enforcement activities. A given state or a given municipality may be very good at doing their monthly checks, or making sure that all the permits that are issued are up to date, right? And there can be one that doesn't even enforce them, right? There is no supervision there. There's so much variability there, and that's part of the problem. Now, those that are regulated under TSCA are the hazardous waste landfills. And those, even though they have a much more stringent set of guidelines that they need to abide by, because they're regulated directly through the federal government, they suffer from poor funding and poor maintenance upkeep. So if there's no money pumping into the system to be able to do these checks and to make sure that the regulations are being followed, then as you can expect, they're not going to be followed. And privately operated landfills often tied, as I mentioned before, right, their income to the amount of waste they receive, right? And so the incentive is to receive waste and to forget about waste sorting guidelines. Now, I'm going to mention the problems with landfills, and there are a lot, but I wanted to keep it a little more concise and a little more general for this particular training. The first one is that all landfills leak. Eventually, they leak. The content inside of them will leak into the surrounding environment, and depending on what's in there, can create serious problems, right? Rain and soil moisture wash through the waste, right? And then accumulate at the bottom of the landfill. Then the liners themselves, as I mentioned before, they eventually let through that water, that leachate, as it's called. When water sips in through the waste, it soaks up and washes down chemicals that are water soluble and other volatiles especially. And then they tend to, they leach out of that bottom liner. All landfills, as I mentioned before as well, are poorly regulated, right? There's a lack of funding, and there's a lack of established financial incentives to make the regulations being abided by, right? And the result is that these toxic materials find their way into municipal landfills, which you would expect to only receive things like household waste, right? But no, they oftentimes tend to get some dangerous chemicals. And all landfills are also built to fail, because inherently the design that has been around for decades, as I mentioned, is flawed. There's no way to contain waste in a dynamic environment where you have rain, where you have moisture in the ground, where you have even organic life inside that moisture that can create movements and problems in any kind of engineered design that you have to contain that waste. So some of the problems include, leachate coming out of the landfill and contaminating the surrounding environment. There could be underground waste fires inside the actual waste. If enough pressure builds and the right conditions happen, underground fires, combustion events can happen that can then release gases into the surrounding environment. And these are the air emissions that can come out of these fires. So, as I mentioned, all these problems happen with landfills, regardless of how well they are engineered and where they're located. And some of the health effects that come with these problems, right? We have the main source are leachate contamination of groundwater and air emissions from gases and toxic gases from the landfill itself. And some of the more harmful chemicals that are not uncommon in a lot of these municipal landfills that we find all around us are these three things: volatile organic chemicals, VOCs, heavy metals, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. And I'm going to touch a little bit on them. VOCs are chemicals like benzene, formaldehyde, and TCE. And they're found in a lot of solvents and pesticides that can make their way into municipal landfills. And they have a myriad of health effects that are very serious. Some of them cause cancers, different types of cancers. A lot of respiratory problems are associated to exposure to things like benzene and formaldehyde, and liver damage as well, liver and kidney damage. Heavy metals, probably the more common one is lead, but you can also find things like hexavalent chromium and manganese in municipal landfills. And these are created using manufacturing processes, right? And so they can make their way into municipal landfills that accept industrial waste, right? So there are various health problems associated. Again, lead is probably the most common example of problems with neurological development in kids, for example, right? Central nervous damage as well. And some of the less known side effects or health effects, I should say, things like kidney disease and stomach and lung cancers from some of these metals. And lastly, there are PAHs, and there are chemicals such as benzoate, and these are created from combustion, from the burning of coal, gas, other organic matter. And these can be released if landfills are let have these smoldering units, as I mentioned before, right? Landfills where you have such a tightly, densely packed organic matter and other chemicals, and then are not handled properly, and perhaps oxygen or other combustible gas finds its way in there, can ignite that and then create an underground fire that can create the ideal conditions for these chemicals to be created and released. And some of the health effects include cancers, different types of cancers, birth defects, and reproductive problems as well. So again, these are all probably some of the more common and more serious health effects that are around landfills. And as you can see, it is not that difficult for these things in a landfill to go wrong, and then for the surrounding community to be exposed by these chemicals and these problems. So with that being said, I'm going to transition over. Let's see if I can make this larger.
What's that?
I'm gonna have to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Ah, there it is. Okay. So I'm going to transition over to Gustavo for the second part of our training. And I should have said this at the beginning. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in our chat. We are going to monitor all of them, and we're going to address them at the end of our presentation. So Gustavo, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. So Jose, if you wouldn't mind, make me a co-host so I can share my screen. And I want to say, so let's take a deep breath here. Exhale. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much, Jose. And yes, we will share presentations and slides with folks, and we hope to continue the conversation. Okay, this is a conversation starter. So in other words, I know that every single bullet that Jose put out there leads to a lot of questions in your heads, and that's completely fine, and that's completely normal. With any any of these points, I almost feel like we could run an entire week-long training. Now, the point here is that we don't want to overwhelm you with the information. What we want to do is use the information to help and advise your campaigns. So from the point of view of somebody who lives next to one of these facilities. Like, remember, we are, we are concerned about people's health here. We're not concerned about industry profits or the economy or blah, blah, blah. Like, we are here only to address the fact that these facilities are hurting us, okay? And we are here to help if you want to fight against that and minimize those impacts. Some of you might be dealing with one of these facilities expanding. So in other words, when you have a landfill that gets full, what do? They try to expand it. And there are ways to fight against that. Some of you might be dealing with a facility that's proposed in your community and you want to keep it out. And there are strategies to fight back against that. Some of you might be just looking for answers about who is to blame for your discomfort, your pain. And in a lot of cases, there are very, very severe and heavy effects on people's health. And I know that some of you have shared with us at length some very personal struggles that your family members are having. So we're here to say that we're on your side. Anything during any of these campaigns, one of the most important things to remember is that this is a fight and we are in a natural conflict here. And it's important for us to get past that fact. So I'm going to start talking. There are a lot of, Jose is a scientist. I am not a scientist. I am an organizer. And what I know is that it is impossible to get somebody to understand something when they have a financial interest in not understanding it. Okay, so that's one of the main rules here. So a lot of times we will come to this work, and we'll come to these campaigns as, citizens and residents, thinking that what we've been told for a long time, the government's here to represent us, and there are regulatory agencies, be they local or be they federal in Washington, D.C., whose job it is to protect the people against these harms. And sometimes that can be a very, very rude awakening as we engage in this work, that things don't work in the way that we've been told they work, or they don't work in the way that they're supposed to. So with that in mind, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to help us through a discussion here about power and what that is. So let me make sure that this is displaying correctly. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. So the reason we're in conflict, as Jose pointed out, is that there are financial incentives for local governments and companies that profit from landfills to get as much waste into their facility as possible. In other words, they're paid by the ton. Okay, so the landfills charge a certain amount of money to take in waste. Now that is measured as a ton of waste. Some of you, I see that there are some folks from Bristol who are here on the call. And I'm thinking about their situation, because a lot of places take in the waste from their local communities, but they also take in waste from nearby states, right? So a lot of companies make money by taking in tons and tons and tons of this waste from other places because they get paid more. Now, you as the resident, as somebody living near one of these facilities, you're not getting a cut of that. What you're getting is more medical bills. What you're getting is a hit on your property values. What you're getting is the pain and aggravation of dealing with the impact that these chemicals have. What you're dealing with is the discomfort of having to smell that stuff. And in a lot of cases, sometimes it's very obvious what you're going through. Other cases, it's not as obvious because it actually doesn't smell like anything. And these chemicals are really silent killers. So on the one hand, you have your interests, which are not wanting to make any big assumptions about everybody who's on the call, but speaking for myself, like my interest is to live a healthy life and raise a family and go to work and pay my bills and take care of my business. Now, these companies are in it to make money by the ton, and they want to keep on doing that. So that is where the natural conflict comes into play. Like, it is a fight no matter how you slice it. And for some folks, it's a little bit harder realization to come to, but the sooner we come to that, the better off we're going to be. Now, the reason that we haven't won, so the reason that we haven't been able to stop landfill expansions is a question of power. It doesn't come down to information as much as we'd like to. Just being right or having the correct information or testing isn't actually the solution to getting this problem solved. The problem is that we don't yet have the power to influence these decision makers, right? In other words, we want the ability to get our governments, we want the ability to get these companies to do something other than what they're doing, and that requires power. So one of the first things that I would suggest that people do is, if you have a situation like this in your neighborhood, in your state, that you make a simple graph, okay? And just point out who has the power in your state, in your county, in your locality. In other words, if you wanted to get a landfill shut down, like, who can do that? Is there a board? Is it a council? Is it a mayor? And then map up and down on the, who has the most influence on that? Can Gustavo say, hey, you know what, this landfill is hereby shut down? No, I can't do that. So I'm going to be, by myself as an individual, I'm going to be way down on this chart vertically, because this is just who has the influence, who has the ability to say yes and no. Now, left and right is where you map who is supporting your point of view, who is supporting your mission, who is supporting your campaign, and who is opposed to it. Because that is something very different. I can be very, very supportive of your position, as I am, but I have a very, very low amount of influence. So the first thing is, let's map something like this. And this is where a campaign can really, really begin, is by having a map. So I would strongly advise us to think about this. In some places, there are actual companies, they're publicly traded companies who are operating and who are running and who are owning a landfill. Some of these companies are called so there's Waste Management. That's the biggest one. Everybody knows them. Everybody's heard of them. There's three big ones. So it's Waste Management is the most well-known. So for a company like that, you can look up on the internet, and we have actually Hunter, who's on this call, has been doing a lot of research on this company. There are individuals in that company who get bonuses, who are incentivized to make that company more profitable, meaning take in more and more waste. Now, I'll ask you rhetorically, if your bonuses, and remember, these are incredibly rich people, and if there's something incredibly rich people really understand, is that every single dollar counts, right? So maybe you and I would say, I don't know, after you have $10 million, do you really need more? To these people, absolutely. Like there's no limits to people's greed. Now, if they have an incentive to get paid more in bonuses by bringing in more and more tons of waste, do you really think they're going to be checking in each of those trucks that are driving by your place every single day, in each of those trucks that are dumping their stuff in the landfill, that to make sure that it's the waste in there is the kind of waste that's supposed to be in there? Or do you think they're just going to take in more and more tons of this stuff? I think the answer is pretty clear. So in some places, there are companies who are running these landfills. In other places, they could be publicly owned facilities. Okay, and that is really going to depend on your own situation and your own case. Now, for all of these, there is some type of agency that is regulating. Like Jose went through some of them. Some of these agencies are run at the state level. And what a lot of folks do, and I would say that this is a strategic mistake, is that they spend their entire campaigns running against a regulatory agency. In other words, there's ATSDR, there's the EPA, right? And so at the national level, there's a lot of fire. That's, by the way, that's not wrong. That's targeted towards the EPA for them to change their ways. But I would say that an equal amount of energy must be spent targeting the companies and the people who are profiting from that waste being there. And in a lot of cases, the company is actually the ones who are influencing the regulatory agencies to look the other way on what they're doing. In other words, they're the people running the show behind the scenes. It's their people who are getting appointed to all of these boards. It's their people who are getting appointed or who are running for office. And if we spend all of our time going after the regulatory agency, well, guess what? Like, that's kind of like yelling at customer service when your power runs out, when your cable runs out, and in a lot of cases, the customer service person is just some sorry ass person in maybe even in a foreign country who's just taking your call, who's getting yelled at. But you can yell at them till you're blue in the face. The company's back there cashing the checks. So let's look at really what's behind the curtain. And if you can map out the financial interests behind the landfill in your community, you're going to be way ahead of the game in terms of understanding the influence and the power that's required to change. We all want to make a change here. So you can have, this is an example, and I'm clicking through, and these are folks with a lot of influence, right? So the companies over here, they strongly oppose our point of view. They are strongly committed to keeping a landfill going, and they have a whole lot of influence. It could be that you have a mayor, a council who are, because of the way politics works, they are generally to the side of the company because that's where the money is. Our job in organizing is pulling everybody to our side, especially those people who are publicly elected, right? So you can run a whole lot of pressure and a whole lot of advocacy using the information that we have, maybe even using the testing, but the information in and of itself is not enough. What we need to do is really grow our power. So I'm going to pause here because this is possibly a lot of information. It's okay if you have a lot of questions that aren't going to be answered here in the next 15 minutes that we have. But we wanted to get this conversation started because it is of vital importance that as you're spending your valuable time running these campaigns, that you have all the information that you need, but also that you focus in towards the targets that are really, really going to make a difference in your communities. So let me open up the line, quote unquote, for questions, whether you have a technical question for Jose. I also want to thank Stephen Lester for being on. Many of you know Stephen and have known him for a long time. I want to thank Sharon Franklin for being on, and everybody. It's really, really good to see everybody. It's 2022, and if anything, let's congratulate each other for making it through another year in this crazy pandemic and in this crazy world.
So to preface that, Gustavo, sorry, I just wanted to let everyone know, I've been trying to answer some of your questions through the chat, some of the technical questions. I hope that I know that I haven't gotten through all of them, but if I didn't get through yours, feel free to ask again during this time, and I'll do my best to answer. And maybe we can go like one each, Gustavo. Does that sound good to you?
Up to you.
Cool. So do you want to just go through the chat? Maybe we can do that.
Yep. And if you're in a place where you can't tap into the chat, you can just you can just unmute yourself and just ask, because I know sometimes when people are on the phone, it's hard to see the chat too. I don't think there's anybody here who's actually on the phone, but if you want to unmute yourself, you can hit *6 and just talk. So should we take a question?
I think there's one here in the chat. I think this might be for you, Gustavo. Let's see. It is Mary Finneran. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. She asks, how best do we get the regulatory agencies to stop rubber stamping things like expansions?
Right. Mary, do you want to talk about your situation a little bit more? I think the short answer is that the regulatory agencies, if they're working, which generally they are, those people are appointed. In other words, you know, they get put there to do a specific job, and you have to look at who is putting them there to do that and what interests they are representing at the regulatory agency. So this is, it's highly political. And when I say political, I don't mean like Democrat and Republican. When I say political, I'm talking about these people get paid by a certain type of interest to perform a certain job on behalf of that interest, right? So if my interest is to bring in more tons of waste into landfill X, and I need you to go in there and do that job for me, then you're going to do it. That's what I mean by political. But you want to talk a little more about your situation?
Yeah, hi, and actually it's also related to a question Clarence Williams had farther up about corruption in the county.
Mhm.
I'm actually working, I'm in New York State, and I'm actually trying to help some people down in the southern tier where Casella manages 2 county landfills and also owns a private landfill, and are constantly looking for expansions. The vice president in charge of this, Casella is based in Vermont, but the vice president of these agents of these 3 landfills is, and actually there's more, is lives right, fairly close to the 3 landfills. And the counties and the towns and are all corrupt. And it seems like the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is a regulatory agency in New York State, that the agent there is very, I mean, we've foiled emails where she's like called the owner of Casella like dearest, so I mean it's really, really corrupt and complicit, and we're working on it. That I think one of the main problems is that what the heck do we do with all this waste that consumerism is producing? It's just, that's it in a nutshell. But anyway, that's what's going on, what I'm fighting on. I live in actually eastern New York State, and
Okay.
near the Dunn landfill, which somebody else referred to. So anyway, how do you say that we get the regulatory agencies to stop,
Sure.
kissing
So
butt?
first of all, oh my God, I can't believe there's corruption in New York State. Say it ain't so. So secondly, look, if there's something that corrupt officials are really sensitive to, is being exposed, right? And that's something that you have the ability to do to really shine a light as a community on what's going on. And there's a million different ways that you can expose somebody who is doing this. Like, they'll be embarrassed, they can be voted out, they can be fired. And remember that you're in a natural state of conflict. So whether you like it or not, like some people, like I was born a very shy, introverted individual, I swear to God. And then through 20 years of organizing, somehow, I've learned that, like, if I want to, like, because I'm not a billionaire, I'm going to have to fight it out. Okay. I'm going to have to fight out for everything that I get. And so I better get comfortable being in the ring with these people. So exposing them in every way, shape, or form is the way that you can get some type of leverage against them, right? And then the other thing that I want to say that's very, very important that I meant to say at the top of my presentation is this: as soon as you start a campaign on landfills, pretty soon some company is going to say, or some official is going to say, well, what do you suggest, Mary, we do with all this waste? Where do you want me to put this? And it's like, let me tell you, so it's not my problem. Mary, it is not your problem. It is not on you or anybody else on this call to solve the United States problem with waste. You can go ahead and talk about recycling till you're blue in the face, or talk about overconsumption, or talk about our culture of capitalism and Amazon and buying all this stuff and shipping and changing. Look, those are problems for people who are basically, it's way above my pay grade. Okay. And it is not my problem. I am not elected to solve the entire problems of the world. What I can tell you is that your problem is that there's a landfill down the street from you who's poisoning you and your family. Like, those are the problems that we can address. I can't change the world, from the top. What we can do is organize and change the world from the grassroots on up. And that's what our job is. So as soon as somebody tries to put that on you to solve the entire waste problem of the world, and what do I do with this construction waste? Not my problem. Go dump it, oh, you're in New York? Great. Go dump it in the Hamptons. How about that? Go dump it in Brooklyn. How about that? Right? You're in California? Oh, you're in Coachella? No, instead of dumping it in the desert near a bunch of tribes who don't have the ability to defend themselves, why don't you go dump that in Malibu and see what happens? Right? That is what I would say to that. Sorry, that was long-winded, but it's an important point.
Yeah. So here's a question, Gustavo. I guess this would be for me, and I'll be brief. Carolyn asked if it's ever safe to build in a closed landfill. Now, it's a tough question to answer. The answer is yes, but there has to be a lot of consideration going into that. What type of landfill it was, right? For example, is it a hazardous waste landfill, or was it a municipal landfill, right? What type of remediation did the landfill go through, right? Was it being, I don't know, was the waste being treated there for, I don't know, potential emissions for dioxins, for example, right? That can find their way into a landfill, or did it, some of the compliance regulatory record of that landfill. How old that landfill is a lot of geographic thought needs to go into it. If there's a source of water around there, right, where leachate can potentially come out through and out into a body of water. So again, the answer is yes, but there's a lot that needs to be done. A lot of research needs to be done to ascertain what was there before, and was it simply something that could be just covered up, put on a liner there, and then expect it to be safe, right? Again, what is also going to be, what is that place going to be used for, right? Is it going to be a factory, or is it going to be a parking lot, right? Or is it going to be a playground for kids, right? That matters. So I think that a lot of those questions need to come into consideration for someone to say yes, it's okay, or no, there's no way we can do this. Let me see. There's another question here that was right after it. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, so Jillian, you asked this. I was just about to answer you before. What is the best way to test for VOCs in the air around a landfill? So there are a number of ways, I suppose. I'm not an expert in this, but there is a sort of a screening kind of tool, a photoionization detector that can be used. Some companies offer that, and some organizations have access to that. And the advantage of that is that it doesn't require laboratory analysis. It can give you sort of quick, immediate results. Now, if you want to, but again, it's kind of presence, yes or no kind of thing. It doesn't really give you a level, right? If you want that, you probably want a Suma canister, and which it's a grab sample, or it can be done over a 24 or 48 hour period of time that collects air, and then seals it, and then is sent to a facility for analysis. But having said that, I think you'd want to figure out whether you really want to do that first. Is that really within? Is it a tool? Again, as I mentioned before, right? Is that a tool going to be advantageous for you in moving forward with your goal of closing that particular facility, or what is it that your goal is, right? So you have to think about it strategically that way before going straight into the testing. And let's see, is there another one?
And if I can channel our founder, Lois Gibbs, on this, is that testing very rarely is going to give you the victory that you want, even though it's very normal and natural to want to test for things. If all we do is testing and we don't do a lot of the power building and organizing work, then that can really play into the hands of our opponents, because we spend a lot of time testing, not a lot of time fighting. And a lot of times the results aren't going to give us what we want.
Yeah. So there's also a question here. Joyce asked if there's an alternative to landfills that, that we should be pushing for. And she says, can we push for taxing companies on the amount of waste that they produce or send to a landfill? Has that ever been attempted, Gustavo, to your knowledge?
What's that?
Taxing companies on the amount of waste that they produce or send to a landfill.
Yes. And so there, in a million different ways, producing waste is a natural product of production, right? So everybody produces waste. All of us are actually taxed on the waste that we produce. I happen to live in Washington, D.C., right outside of Virginia, and I pay garbage taxes, right? Companies do that. The whole idea behind Make Polluters Pay, behind that campaign, behind Superfund, is actually putting a dollar amount on the waste that's produced by all these companies. And so absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of alternatives that we can push for, I'm not, I don't have the engineering background to be able to say, but I'm sure that there's, I would have to do some more research into that. But I don't think that there's a viable alternative right now, necessarily that we could, kind of try to advocate here for. What we would try to advocate for, right, is what Gustavo was saying, to kind of change the system, right? A system that incentivizes waste, that makes money off of waste, right? And try to move away from that, and onto something that that isn't a corporate machine like that.
So we are, unfortunately,
Yeah.
we're out of time. And as I promised, we did not have enough time to address everybody's question. But hopefully we got a conversation started. What I would like to propose is that we do a follow-up call to this, because there's been so much interest, and I really do want to hear from more of you. And if you are not signed up, please sign up for updates from CHEJ. You can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. So do all the clicking and liking of that stuff. You know what to do. And we are going to be in touch. If you'd like a copy of this presentation, send us a message. I'm going to drop the email address. It's chej2@chej.org. So drop us a line there, and we can email you the PowerPoints, etc., and we'll keep you informed about follow-up conversations. I think it's important. Jose, I just can't thank you enough. You want to close it up?
Of course, of course. So again, thank you everybody for participating. We'll figure out what the follow-up will look like. And we will, send out the invitation, within the next couple of weeks. And if it's just a Q&A kind of session, I think that would be worthwhile with both Gustavo and I. We'll keep an eye out for that. And again, we thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you all. And it's still January, so Happy New Year. Stay safe out there, 2022. Let's try to make it through this one too. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you.